I'm Melissa.
And I'm Lee, and we are busy mums, company founders, and all-round early learning nerds. Welcome to our podcast, Growing Little Humans.
Kids aren't born with a user manual, so each week we'll try and cover many topics that you guys encounter and worry about each and every day while you're raising your little humans. On today's episode, we will be talking about the Early Years Learning Framework, or EYLF.
And we are so excited to have Karen McCord with us. Karen is from Brisbane, Australia, and she spent the last 34 years in the education department with the Queensland Department of Education, and she is a very experienced principal and has been working with international schools for over 20 years, and is the inaugural principal at the Australian International School in Dubai, which has now been open for 3 years, Karen.
It has. Hi, ladies. Thanks for having me.
What an introduction.
I know, I'm thinking I'm very old.
You've had an amazing career. Well done to you, Karen.
Yeah.
So today we've asked you to join us as a specialist to talk about the Early Years Learning Framework. So I guess in a nutshell, what is the Early Years Learning Framework?
What is it exactly? So EYLF is really about 3 areas of a child. It's about the being in terms of who they are. It's about belonging, and that's about belonging in the room that they might be working with or the play area within the early learning centre. It's also about the belonging with their family, because partnerships between family and school are really important, obviously. And then the third part of the EYLF is becoming. So it's about the fact that what is it next after they understand who they are, how they operate within the environment. What they need to do next is really about that next step. And it's important to understand that the EYLF doesn't focus on the becoming first, which a lot of education systems do. It's actually about the child right there, right now, and giving them the time and the space, directing themselves in their learning, being able to move forward.
And you spoke about in other systems that the becoming doesn't come first, it comes first rather than last. So how does that look in the classroom for children?
In the classroom, it's about play. So so from the beginning, the teachers, if it's a true play-based system, the teachers are understanding what the children want to learn. The children are the agents, if you like, of their own learning. So they decide how and what that might look like. An experienced teacher then works with the children to make sure they can draw out of the children what it is that the learning needs to be based on the child's interests.
And so for me as a non-educator, Karen, how does the EYLF help to develop my child? Like, how will I know that framework is working for my child?
I think the great thing about EYLF is it's about your child individually. So it's not about what the group are doing. It's about what your child's doing and what they need to be doing at that point in time. So we don't have any time frames. It's about your child's journey, not anyone else's journey. And so that's the most important thing.
And they can take it at their own pace.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And so a big part for us as the Wishing Tree is that we want to develop little ones holistically. So does the EYLF support a child's holistic development?
Absolutely. When we talk about holistic development, we're really talking about their spiritual, their psychological, their physical development and their cultural development. When we think about the world getting smaller and smaller, and particularly in this part of the world, we have so many cultures. It's about understanding and valuing every part of the child's environment and understanding how we can work with all of those different environments and all of that different understanding about how children develop to make sure that they're getting the richest learning they can for themselves.
And that's actually one thing I really love about living in the Middle East is the fact that we are such a melting pot of cultures and communities, and so it's great that the EYLF can help children celebrate that and be global citizens.
Absolutely. I think the really important thing is that it's a framework. It isn't about every checkpoint. Children have to do certain things. It's about them being able to take their time with the people around them, and sometimes it's by themselves, and the teacher helps bring the children together at different points if we recognise they need to be encouraged to do a little bit more socialisation, for example. But it's about their journey. It's not our journey as adults. And I think lots of parents get caught up in the fact, particularly when they're with their friends and they're comparing what their child can do compared to everybody else. As an educator, it's about us making sure that parents understand their child as their child. Yes, we have developmental milestones, But the great thing about children, and if we think about ourselves even from a physical development, not every child gets their teeth at the same time. Not everybody starts to talk at the same time. Not everybody starts to walk at the same time. And I think for too long in education, we've forgotten that. We think that we have to have our children at a certain point, and I think we need to go back and be talking to parents about the fact this is your child's journey. It's not your friend's child, and your child keeping up with your friend's child.
And I think too, in those early years especially, do you think it's true that they talk about in some countries that children start formal learning later because the rate that by 6 and 7 they're all kind of hitting about the same point and they're ready to do that further learning. So in those early years, especially the 0 to 6, it's much more organic, their learning, and it happens at different paces like you're talking about.
Absolutely. The organicness that you talk about, Lee, is critical. It's about understanding that child's ready at that point in time. Within a class of 15 or 20 children, you might have 4 or 5 that are ready to read, and that's okay. And the teacher will make sure that they're doing things and supporting the conversation. I'm not actually telling them what to do, but supporting the conversation and the learning so that the children are excited about what they're doing. I think the great thing about EYLF is that it encourages children to love learning. And, as adults, we don't want to do what we don't want to do. And I think we forget that we shouldn't be telling kids that they need to know certain things. Absolutely, they need to know some things. But when we're talking about developing a love of learning, they need to be the ones responsible for what it is they want to learn.
Yeah, and I think I've always found that a lot of times parents, we talked about children and parents will come with their preconceived ideas about what they're expecting for their children. So how do you, educate a parent that has a real mindset about this is what their expectations are for their children?
I think sometimes that's a very long journey.
It is, absolutely, it is. Baby steps.
The interesting thing for me, being open in Dubai for the last 3 years, is that parents do their homework. There's lots of parents that will never walk through the door because they believe that their children need to be writing at 4 years old and must know the times tables by the time they're 6 years old. So automatically, if they really are interested, they'll come. We'll have the conversations about, and I think most importantly, we actually do our tours during open hours because it's important for the parents to actually see what it looks like. It's okay to read something on a screen or in a book or talk about it, but for us it's about tours happening while the children are at school so that they can actually see what's happening in the classrooms. That's usually the turning point. A lot of people don't understand what they really don't know, and so many people, particularly in this part of the world, have been educated very differently. So they need to understand that they need to know their child, and we talk lots about their child and what it is they want for their children. And pretty much through that conversation, you'll work out whether this is the right environment or whether the parents' expectations are very different from what we believe.
And like you were saying, Karen, when we talk about what parents' expectations are, education has evolved so much, and like the EYLF has come into being through research, through observation. So what your parents are seeing today is so far removed from what they experienced.
Absolutely, and they recognise that. One of the interesting things for us here in Dubai is that a lot of parents that haven't been educated in Australia may have done postgraduate education through Australian universities or in Australia. And even through the postgraduate study, they've realised that their education system probably didn't do for them what it should have done. So they certainly, probably 10-15% of our population come and say, look, we've experienced it as adults. We actually want our children in this from the beginning, which is a great start. And when, parents talk, and it's around those conversations where we get more and more coming and saying, we've heard about this, we actually want to see it. Can you show me? This is what this parent's talked about. This is what, when I see the kids playing, we see that the children from your school are much more independent than my child is in their current institution. That sort of stuff means a lot to us. And even 3 and 4 weeks in, after the children might have had a different start from a curriculum point of view, our parents consistently talk about the independence that their children have gained just in the short time they've transitioned across to our place.
So you're seeing a lot of success in children that have started in different curriculums and moving through that.
Yeah.
And just to add a bit further to that, obviously a big concern for all parents is when their child leaves and then they go on to big school, so to speak. So the early years learning framework links into the Australian curriculum.
Absolutely. It's lovely how the Australian curriculum itself has been in place for 15, 20 years now. EYLF obviously transitions beautifully because the values are the same, and constantly, because we are a P12 school, constantly the conversations I have with teachers, because for those in education, teachers at different parts of schooling are very different creatures, and we constantly get our staff together, and it's really interesting to see the teachers of the older kids who, when our early years teachers start talking about what they've been doing with their kids and the questions they've been asking, say, oh, that's actually exactly what our kids are doing in year 10 or year 11 or whatever it might be. And the reality is that if we're teaching play-based learning correctly and you have an educator in front of the child that actually understands what true play-based learning is, the kids across a whole school from 3 years old to 18 can be asked the same question. It might be different language.
Yeah.
It might actually be talked about differently. The way that they get to solving the problem might be different. But at the end of the day, it's essentially the same outcome. And when you actually do that in a whole school setting and have the luxury of being able to see kids from the beginning right through the end, for me, there's nothing more enriching to see that we actually can talk to kids the same and can do the same things with kids no matter how old they are.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And Karen, you know that Melissa and I are launching the Wishing Tree Early Learning Centres. Yeah. So I think one thing that might be of interest to our listeners is if their child was in utilising the early years learning framework at our early learning centre, but then perhaps they were considering going on to a British school or an American school.
Yeah.
How does that transition happen? Would, going from an Australian early years system into a British elementary or an American elementary, do you find that's a problem?
I think it depends on the child. At the end of the day, every child is different. Some children will be able to transition very easily. Other children won't be. And that's even within our school, our children all transition differently from the early years into prep. So it's about knowing that some children might need to be accessing that school that they're going to with small bites. It might be an hour a day, it might be an hour a week as a starting point. We've got a little boy at the moment who's transitioning even within the early primary from year 1 to year 2. We're starting his transition next week because we know that it's going to be very stressful for him to have a new teacher in a different part of the school. Yeah. So it's about the childcare providers. So in your case, I know you guys would do this. From a Wishing Tree point of view, at that point, every conversation with every child and their parent will be very different depending on the system that the children are going into. I think that's the critical thing.
Yeah. But there's not an issue with moving from an early years learning framework into a British curriculum or into an American curriculum. Like the early years is because it's so organic and it's more about progressive learning. Do you find that it doesn't?
The kids are usually more independent, so the parents will talk to us. Usually they stay at our school, but when they've come and transitioned from, like if they've been in Australia at an early years framework, gone to another country, into another system where there might not be an Australian curriculum, then come back to us. What we've found is the kids were very independent to start with early. The parents have talked about them becoming more rote learners, if you like, probably less inquisitive, sometimes a little bit more bored because they've been used to leading their own learning, and then transitioning back into like an IB system or an Australian system, I think is a lot easier. But at the same time, what the parents will find is that their children should be, because of the rigour of the questioning that we have in our early years, the children won't just be empty vessels sitting waiting to be told what to do. They'll be asking questions. That inquisitiveness that our curriculum really I think hones in children, I think makes a difference. So they'll be more inquisitive learners in any other system.
In any environment.
Yeah.
So if we came into a classroom that was delivering the EYLF, what would that look like? Where would the educator be or the teacher be in regards to where the children are? What would we
They
kind of
could
see?
be anywhere.
Exactly.
It depends.
Okay.
So typically at the end of the week, our teachers will ask the children what it was that they loved, what it is that they'd like to learn next. And so they'll then come in on the Monday and be, in a room there might be 4 or 5 stations. There's also lots of free play areas as well. It's a really skilled teacher will be able to see a group of children playing. They'll move to that group and they'll start the conversations, and it is the high order questioning. They'll talk about, let's say the children are playing with animals from a farm. Are there only these type of animals? What else might there be? And start the conversation about different environments and the different types of animals in different continents. And the rest of the children might be working in other areas, but it's about the educator knowing that they can either set up the play spaces for the kids to be inquisitive or move across to the children when they're actually playing to start the conversation moving forward. But at the end of the day, it's about the children directing their learning. It isn't about the teacher telling them what they must do.
What they must do, yeah. And I really love when you said before about, we're trying to get children to love learning because, for a lot of people it's really a problem having their child liking going to school. So if at this very young age we can give them that beautiful foundation of enjoying their educational experience, surely that's going to serve them well throughout their schooling.
Absolutely. One of the great things about early learning, if it's aligned, and particularly because ours does align then with the Australian curriculum, is the fact that it's teaching the children to be really well-functioning adults. And what do we want for our kids? I talked a little bit at the start about the fact that a lot of systems start at the becoming. So the child might be here, but hey, we've got 6 weeks, we wanted to get them to there, rather than giving them the time and the space. At the end of the day, if we've set them up in the early years, our kids are going to love learning throughout school. And they're going to continue to be independent, to be critical thinkers, to actually understand cultures and the fact that we should be embracing everybody and understand and be tolerant of each other. It's all those really good community values, and we start teaching it early, and if we're doing the right thing throughout school, they end up that way at the end. And they've got 18 years to do it, and we shouldn't be rushing it. It's about when that child is ready.
And I think the EYLF is just, so we talk about it being international best practice, and that's why, because there's always been, we always talk about a focus on tertiary education, then it was a focus on the primary and elementary, and now we're saying, if we're having, amazing experiences at this age where we're meeting children's needs and giving them that sense of agency, then they're going to have a lifelong learning, and they're going to be able to follow that through their whole experience. So it's really, it's really good progressive that the EYLF is, that's decided that's how it's going to work, and it's meeting those children where their individual needs are.
Yeah, I think we're very lucky in Australia that very early on the government realised, and early educators were involved as part of that we actually needed to be, I think, global leaders. Obviously there's other systems that we've based ourselves on and that have reflected us as well. But at the end of the day, if we're really focused on children, it's about the children. And, even in big school, we talk about, people or parents will come and say, well, we want to do this. And I have to say to parents, but it's not your school, it's your child's school. The children will make those decisions. And quite often it's sad when they say, well, they're too young to make those decisions. Well, no, they're not. If we actually give children the opportunity and the scaffolding to be able to make decisions, they do a really good job.
Yeah. And I remember when you were designing your playgrounds, you were talking about you'd done it in consultation with the children at the school, and that's probably a classic example of
absolutely
giving them the agency.
Absolutely. And those agreements at the start, the playground agreements that you're going to sit with the children and develop them together. This is how we're going to play, and this is how we're going to use this space, and they're involved and they have ownership over that, which is just fantastic.
It is. It's about knowing that no matter what age, children should be valued, and they actually do understand. Sometimes it's a about the fact that the adults don't actually frame it the way that they need to frame it, or they don't understand the children well enough. And our job as educators is to make sure that we provide the time and the space for the children to be able to develop properly, that we educate the parents so that they actually do understand their children. And where we need to, we bring in all of the other community around. You know, it's important that we are part of a community when we're a child centre or a school. And that community, you know, we talk all the time about it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it's about.
Yeah. Okay. And in the corporate world, we call that stakeholder buy-in.
Exactly.
And, you know, it makes perfect sense in any, whether we're talking about it, you know, in a corporate world or in early years, that when they've been involved in the process, they're much more likely to respect those, you know, boundaries that they've helped to set.
Exactly right. And children, exactly the same, you know, like out of the mouths of babes is something that we always talk about. And, you know, you can't get more honesty than out of a child. And they will tell you, I don't want to do this. I would rather do this. And that's a whole conversation. And it's okay if they want to do those things because it's about them being able to express their feelings. So, you know, part of this play-based learning is also expressing emotion and being able to explain what it is that they need. You know, it's so important as part of play, and through play and those social dynamics, we build the lifelong skills in terms of good communication.
Yeah, it's another part of their development, isn't
Absolutely.
it? Like the social, emotional, the communication skills. It's all part of development.
It is.
So, Karen, thank you so much for joining us today. We know that you are an absolute expert on the early years learning framework because you do deliver it at the Australian International School, Dubai.
And we have been talking about the EYLF today because that is what we're going to be delivering at the Wishing Tree. So we're going to pop some more information about belonging, becoming, being, what we talked about today, and the EYLF in our episode notes, as well as if you want to contact Karen and ask any questions, you'll be able to email the school.
Thanks for having us, girls. It's been fantastic.
Thanks for coming, Karen.
Thank you. Bye.
And here come the legals. Our podcast is purely brought to you for educational and entertainment purposes. We are just two hectic mums and we are certainly not licensed therapists.
This podcast is not intended as a substitute for the advice of licensed or qualified professionals. And if you do need some help, please seek out some professional advice.